The clock is ticking for planet Earth, and time is running out. Unless we reverse the damage caused by humanity, we'll lose even more of our forests and natural habitats for wildlife and many important and endangered species. But there is hope. We can turn back the clock. Working with local communities, young people, and other partners, we're inspiring actions through the message of hope across every continent, protecting endangered species and their habitats, and creating a more harmonious relationship between people, animals, and our shared environment. Help rewind the future with the Jane Goodall Institute.
Hi, welcome. Hello. Hello, welcome. This is exciting, isn't it? Oh, hello up there. Thank you for coming tonight. You didn't have to come. You could have stayed home. Got your beauty sleep ahead of the Game of Thrones finale tomorrow, but no, you came out. In that cold wind, you came out. And so I can only conclude that I'm surrounded by the 2,207 most intelligent, virtuous, attractive people in the Wellington region. Welcome. Give yourselves a round of applause. My name's Jesse Mulligan. I'm your host. I can see that we have... it's okay. We can... My mother, everybody. No. I can see that we have in our audience, and this is really exciting, some school-aged children. I wonder if you could give them a special welcome. People say all sorts of positive, inspiring things about children in this sort of situation, and sadly it always boils down to, you are the future. Sorry. But you are not the problem because you are here. You're doing something about it. Make some noise if you came to the Michael Fowler Centre tonight on some form of zero carbon transport. Really? Oh, that's good. That is a noise I don't expect they'll hear in Auckland. Okay. Go on then. How'd you get here? Make some noise. Anyone bike in the dark? Yeah, okay. Anyone beat the feet? Okay, great, great. Anyone take a Lime scooter in from the hut? Train, anyone take the train? Okay, a few of you, yeah. Anyone drive a Tesla? No. Well, that's zero carbon, but you get all Elon's methane, so it doesn't really work. I haven't even done the important stuff yet. I'll tell you about the sponsors in a second. I just wanted to say this, by the way, because this is really exciting for me. Who else in the room, despite normally being quite a professional, growing up sort of person, finds himself with just a little bit of a crush on our guest speaker tonight? I know. Me too, and I've got to interview her. I met her backstage. Do you know what I said to one of the greatest conservationists and humanitarians of our time? I said, I just saw your doco. You look really cool in that khaki outfit. Right? She took it with great grace, as you might imagine. She said, "We didn't care how they looked, we just wore them." So an official welcome to Dr. Jane Goodall, Rewind the Future. It's presented by the Goodall Institute, New Zealand, and Loop Recordings. Loop, who, by the way, have been challenging creative and intellectual culture, providing challenging creative and intellectual culture for almost 20 years. You'll see some of their music videos on screen during the intermission tonight. They do some really cool things. We're supported tonight by News Talk ZB and by JGINZ Family Wines. Please turn your cell phones to silent. You can leave them on, you can tweet, do whatever you need to do. The hashtags for tonight are Jane Goodall and Rewind the Future. If you don't know what a hashtag is, I'm afraid it's already too late for you. As well as Dr. Goodall, we have a really inspiring young speaker first up. I'll let Jane introduce her. And then we'll have an interval, about 25 minutes for an interval, and then a chat between myself and decide whether I'm going to call her Dr. Goodall or Jane. I'll ask her during the break. I don't want to get it wrong. So I want to repeat that whole khaki outfit thing. So a Q&A between her and I, and then that'll be that, and we'll get you out of here just after 10 o'clock tonight. I want to speak about the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand, JGINZ, where they are on a mission. They're taking action on global and local sustainability issues. And most importantly, they are working towards creating an informed and compassionate critical mass of people who will help to create a better world for people and animals and for our shared environments. And they're using their position to advocate on key issues that power their mission, issues that are important to Dr. Goodall and specific to New Zealand. They're focused on sustainable development, protecting biodiversity, a huge issue here in New Zealand, and sustainability education, and increasing New Zealanders' awareness of sustainable living options, that's a good one, and inspiring them and empowering them to make compassionate choices. They are leading on issues such as wildlife trafficking. Unbelievably, that is an issue in New Zealand. And they're partnering with other organisations on things like sustainable consumerism and supporting others on issues like New Zealand biodiversity, advocating for national and regional policy changes and cultivating corporate partnerships. And they're inspiring and empowering young people too, and you'll hear a bit more about that in a moment. This critical mass of citizens, what we need right now, this critical mass making daily decisions and leadership choices that are guided not by the old-fashioned stuff, but by compassionate and holistic thinking, and preparing young people to live more sustainable lifestyles. And not just do it themselves, but influencing others to do the same thing. Youth-led action that respects the interconnectedness of people and other animals and our shared environment. You may have heard of Roots and Shoots, their sustainability and citizenship education program. That is designed to increase compassionate decision-making and skill building via project-based learning. We'll hear some of those tonight. And as part of that program, they do outreach and participation directly into New Zealand schools, and they support projects that make a difference. And they increase young New Zealanders' self-worth by empowering them to be change makers. And the next major step is the development of a digital platform to provide resources and enable action for educators, learners, and the community on sustainable futures. Finally, they're also looking to launch an annual Roots and Shoots Trailblazer Summits. We'll meet one of those trailblazers soon, inspiring and empowering New Zealand students to make a difference. So action is key. You'll hear that from Dr. Goodall tonight. Action to work for the prosperity of animals, people, and our planet. And you have done so much already. If when you saw the ticket price for this event, you thought, yep, okay, I'll pay that. Know that the proceeds from that ticket and from the merchandise sold tonight go directly to JGINZ. So thank you for attending. Let me introduce the woman herself. Most of us have come here tonight because we think we know the story of the legendary conservationist and humanitarian Jane Goodall. We're inspired and we're fascinated by the grit and determination it took for her to leave England at the age of 26 to live with chimpanzees in Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania, and in doing so to challenge some of those long-held views about those magnificent animals and about our relationship to them. And I should tell you this little secret, which is that Dr. Jane Goodall is actually not a huge fan of traveling, which makes what she's doing today at age 85 even more impressive. She's away from home 300 days a year, and not because she has the wanderlust. She does it because she has to. She's compelled to talk to people like you and me about not just the threats facing her beloved chimpanzees, but the threats facing the entire planet because of the way we're treating it. And she's compelled to share her hope, her unwavering hope that each of us will play our part to solve the problems that we created. Ladies and gentlemen, the guest of honor.
It's been an amazing journey, this life of mine. This planet has filled me with the wonder of all living things, great and small. We cannot ignore this earth that surrounds us, that feeds us, shelters us, replenishes our bodies and our souls, and stretches our imaginations, where animals, plants, air, water, all care for us. We're all interconnected. People, animals, our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. And when nature flourishes, we all flourish. I do believe in the possibility of a world where we can live in harmony with nature, but only if every one of us does our part to make that world a reality. So that when you look back over your journey, your life, you can truly say, I did make a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Jesse, and thank all of you for coming tonight, and especially thank you for a wonderful welcome. So I think you deserve a very special greeting, which some of you may recognize, but here goes. Me, Jane, in chimpanzee. Well, I wonder how it is that a little girl growing up in England is now traveling the world and attracting all these people who are here tonight. It's a strange story. It's one that I don't even truly understand myself. It's something that just happened. But I want to start off by saying that this journey of mine, which now has taken me to many, many parts of the world, could not be undertaken if it wasn't for the people who support me along the way. And here in New Zealand, it's the team of the Jane Goodall Institute New Zealand, JGI. And with us here today is the board chair, Neil Gilbert, and our executive director, Melanie Vivian. And I know there are volunteers here as well. And I know that my cousin, Zephanie Locke-Lampson, is also here. So all of these people helping me on my way. But one person above all I really give credit to for enabling me to do what I've done, and that's my extraordinary mother. I was born loving animals. People say, how did your love of animals begin? Some people have the mistaken idea that it began because my father gave me a stuffed chimpanzee toy when I was 1.5 years old. But although I loved Jubilee, it wasn't Jubilee who triggered my love of animals. I was born wanting to watch every little creepy crawly thing. My mother tells how when I was 1.5, she came into my room at night, and there I'd taken a whole handful of earthworms, and she said, Jane, you were looking at them as though you wondered how they walk without legs. And then a very special story, and it happened when I was 4.5 years old. We lived in London, big city, not so many animals there. I remember vividly that she took me for a holiday into the country onto a farm, a proper farm, where animals graze in the fields and hens cluck around in the farmyard. And after a bit, I was given a job to collect the hens' eggs. There were about, 6 or something of these little wooden hen houses where the hens slept at night, but they also laid their eggs in boxes around the edge. So I would look for the eggs and pop them into my little basket. Well, apparently, after a while, I began asking everybody, but where is the hole on the hen big enough for the egg to come out? Because I couldn't see a hole like that. Obviously, nobody satisfied my curiosity. So what I remember vividly is seeing this hen. She was brown, and she was going into one of these hen houses, and I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. So I crawled after her. Well, that was a big mistake. Squawks of fear, she flew out. So in that little 4-year-old mind, I must have thought, no hen will lay an egg here now. It's a frightening place, but I'm on the path of discovery. So I went into an empty hen house and waited, and waited, and waited, which was fine for me, but poor Mum had no idea where I was. I was apparently gone for at least 4 hours. My patience was rewarded. This hen came in. She had her back to me. I saw her rise up a little on her legs, and this slightly soft egg plop out onto the straw. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. Buck, 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 buck. Anyhow, my poor mother, having no idea where I was, had even called the police. And yet, when she saw this excited little girl rushing towards the house, instead of getting angry with me, how dare you go off without telling us where you've been, she sat down to listen to the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And I tell that story for a reason. Isn't that the making of a little scientist? Curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there in that 4-year-old child, and a different kind of mother might have crushed that curiosity, and I might not have done what I've done. She continued to support my love of animals. As I grew older, she found books for me about animals, thinking I would learn to read more quickly. So when I was growing up, there was no TV. It hadn't been invented. So learning came from listening to older people and reading books. Well, I was 8 years old when I met Dr. Dolittle. And if you don't know Dr. Dolittle, find the story of Dr. Dolittle and read it, because you'll learn a lot. And then when I was 10 years old, by this time World War II was raging. My father had joined the British Army. We had very little money. Everything was rationed. You had to have coupons for food and for clothing and for petrol and all the rest of it. And as I say, we had very, very little money, but I used to save up my pennies of pocket money. Most of the books I read came from the library, but I found a little second-hand bookshop, and I used to spend most Saturday afternoons there. And on this occasion, there was this little book, and I could just afford it. It was called Tarzan of the Apes. I read it from cover to cover. Of course, I fell passionately in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what did Tarzan do? He married the wrong Jane. So I was jealous, but of course I knew there wasn't really a Tarzan. But that's when my dream began. I will grow up, I will go to Africa, I will live with wild animals, I will write books about them. Everybody laughed at me. How will you get to Africa? You don't have money. Africa's far away. We called it the Dark Continent because we didn't know much about it. And anyway, they said, you're just a girl. Girls didn't do things like that. But whereas other people said to me, dream about something you can achieve, my mother said, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work awfully hard and take advantage of every opportunity, but don't give up. And that's the message that I've taken to young people all around the world, particularly those in disadvantaged communities. And I wish Mum was alive to know how many people have come up to me or written to me to say, Jane, I want to thank you. You taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. Well, when I left school, I was good at school. I didn't like it much. I wanted to be out watching the birds and the squirrels. But I was good at my lessons. I should have gone to university, but we didn't have enough money. Just enough money for a really boring secretarial course, shorthand, typing, bookkeeping. But I had to get a job. I had to get money. And then came the opportunity. I was working in London, and a school friend invited me to go to Kenya where her parents had bought a farm. And that was the opportunity. Wasn't enough money, I couldn't save in London. So I went home, I worked in a hotel around the corner as a waitress. And finally, after I think it was about 6 months, I'd saved up enough money for a return fare to Africa. It was by boat in those days. There were a few planes, but they were very expensive. We should have gone from London through the Suez Canal to Mombasa. But there was a war with Egypt and the Suez Canal was closed. So the boat went all the way around Cape Town. It took about a month. The first place I landed in Africa was Cape Town. It's beautiful, Table Mountain, and Mum had some friends there, and so I went to stay with them for the 2 days the boat was in harbor. And at first it was wonderful, but then I kept seeing on the seats in the parks and on the doors into the restaurants and the hotels everywhere these words in Afrikaans, slechts blank. What did they mean? They meant white people only. It was the height of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And when I learned about that, I didn't like being there anymore. It was better when I got to Kenya. Kenya was just moving into independence from British rule. And I was fortunate in that when I'd been in Kenya about, 2 months maybe, I heard about the late Louis Leakey, famous anthropologist and paleontologist, searching for the fossilized remains of our earliest human ancestors. Somebody said, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Louis. So I made an appointment. I went to see him at the Natural History Museum where he was curator. I remember him taking me around and asking me so many questions about all the animals and specimens there. And because I'd spent hours in the Natural History Museum in London and read every book I could get hold of about African animals, I could answer many of his questions. And I think he was impressed. And guess what? I talked about that boring secretarial course. 2 days before I met Louis Leakey, his secretary had suddenly quit. He needed a secretary, and there I was. You never know in this life, do you? At any rate, there I was, surrounded by people who could answer all my questions, well, not all of them, but most of them, about the mammals and the birds and the amphibians and the insects and the plants and all the rest of it. And so it was a fantastic learning experience for me. And I think Leakey continued to be impressed by how much I'd already learned and how eager I was to learn more. At any rate, this led to him eventually offering me the opportunity to go and live with and learn from not just any animal, but the one most like us, the chimpanzee. It took a year to get the money. Who was going to give money to this young girl who hadn't even been to college? But eventually a wealthy American businessman said, "All right, Louis, here's money for 6 months. We'll see how she does." It was when I was, as you heard, 26, that I began the research at Gombe. But I'd actually gone to Africa for the first time when I was just 23. And in those days, a 23-year-old was more like a 17-year-old today. Today, it's normal for young people to go out around the world. How amazing that my mother let me go off to Africa on my own when I was so young. At any rate, now I'm 26. And when I get to Gombe, the biggest problem was that chimpanzees are very conservative. They'd never seen anything like me before, a white ape. We are apes. And they would take one look and run into the vegetation. So although I knew from my experience with the animals, I'd grown up with wild animals around my home, if I had time, I could gain their trust. But did I have time? Weeks turned to months. And it wasn't until the 4th month, towards the end of the 4th month, that this never-to-be-forgotten day occurred. By that time, one chimpanzee, whom I named David Greybeard, he had a beautiful white beard, he had begun to lose his fear of me. And on this day, through my binoculars, because I still couldn't get very close, but I saw him sitting on a termite mound. I saw him break off grass stems, push them down into the termite mound, pull them out with termites biting on, and eat off this lovely feast. And I saw him also break off leafy twigs, and to use them as tools, he had to strip the leaves. At that time, it was thought that humans, and only humans, used and made tools. It was a breakthrough. And it was that which enabled Louis Leakey to approach the National Geographic Society in the United States. They agreed, firstly, to provide money for me to carry on with the research, but secondly, and more importantly in a way, although they both go together, they sent out a young filmmaker and photographer, Hugo van Lauwijk. When I first sent information about the tool using and tool making behavior back to the UK, there were many scientists who said, well, why should we believe her? She hasn't been to college. She's just a girl. But when Hugo began filming this tool-using behavior and the other behavior of the chimpanzees, these skeptics had to believe what I was saying was true. So this was the turning point. Now I could settle down. I knew I had time. And gradually, the chimpanzees out in the forest, ones that we now know are part of a community of about 50 individuals, they gradually became known to me, some of them almost like members of my family. I suspect some of you here have seen the movie, the latest Geographic documentary, Jane, and some of those characters are portrayed in that movie, very nostalgic for me, reliving the days that I spent with David Greybeard and his closest companion, Goliath, whom I learned was the top-ranking or alpha male, and old Flo with her various offspring, and all the other males and females. And it soon became apparent that each one had his or her own personality. They were different from each other. There were good chimpanzee mothers and much less good ones. But over the years, it became obvious that the good mothers were affectionate, they were protective but not overprotective. Most important of all, they were supportive. So they would go and support their child, even though that might bring them into conflict with a higher-ranking individual. And again, looking back over the years, we realize that it's the offspring of those supportive mothers who have tended to do better. The males rise higher in the male hierarchy, are likely to sire more infants, and the females are better mothers. It's fascinating to watch how different males strive to achieve a high position in this male hierarchy, and many of them are not content until either they've reached the top-ranking alpha position or they've been so soundly trashed that they give up. And when you watch them competing with each other, they swagger upright, they shake their fists, they bunch their lips in a furious scowl, they're trying to intimidate their opponent. And it reminds me so much of some male politicians. At any rate, I was also really fascinated by the development of infants and the behavior of the mothers, the development of relations between mother and offspring and between brothers and sisters. There's not time to go into it now, but it's a fascinating study. And sometimes these bonds will last throughout a life of, in the wild, anything up to 60 years. I was struck all the time, increasingly, by the fact that so much of their behavior was so like ours. The way they communicated with postures and gestures, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, begging for food with outstretched hand, swaggering, shaking the fist, using a number of different objects as tools in different contexts. And also they, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I was fascinated by this behavior, so like ours. And not just in gestures, postures, and tool using, but sadly and tragically, I discovered that they also have a dark and brutal side, just like we do. They're capable of a kind of primitive war, but just like us, they also have a loving, compassionate, and altruistic side to their nature. It was amazing to watch an adult individual, male or female, adopt an infant whose mother had died. For the first 3 years, the child is absolutely dependent on the mother's milk. But if they're over 3 years, then they are adopted by some other individual. They have a chance of surviving. If they have an older brother or sister, that sibling will look after them. But otherwise, as I've said, it may be a non-related individual, an example of true altruism. It became increasingly obvious that there isn't a sharp line dividing us from them, from our closest living relatives. We know today that the DNA of humans and chimpanzees, the structure of it, differs by only just over 1%. And there are many other striking biological differences as well. Louis Leakey sent me to Cambridge after 2 years. He said I would have to get a degree to get my own money when he was no longer around. He said, "Jane, there's no time for you to get a BA. I've got you a place in Cambridge University to do a PhD in ethology." I didn't even know what ethology was. You couldn't Google back then. We mostly communicated with written letters, or if it was really important, it was a telegram. Anyway, when I got to Cambridge, I was extremely nervous. I was nervous of these erudite professors. So can you imagine how I felt when so many of them told me I'd done everything wrong? I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. They should have had numbers. That was scientific. So I would have been talking to you about number 1 and 12 and 57. Wouldn't have meant much to you, and you wouldn't remember it, but then nor would I. They told me I couldn't talk about chimpanzees having personalities, minds capable of problem solving, and above all, I couldn't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, anger, and so on. Fortunately, when I was young, I had a teacher who taught me that in this respect anyway, these learned professors were completely, absolutely, utterly wrong. And that teacher was my dog. You cannot share your life in a meaningful way with a dog, cat, rabbit, horse, pig, bird, I don't care what it is, and not know that we are not the only beings on this planet with personalities, minds, and above all, feelings. We're part of and not separated from the rest of the animal kingdom. At any rate, I got my PhD in spite of everything. I went back to Gombe, and I think those were the best days of my life. I built up a research station. There were young people with new ideas, studying different aspects of chimp behavior, all the time adding to our knowledge of these amazing beings. But I could also spend hours out in the rainforest on my own. And there it was that I began to understand the interrelatedness of all living things, and how each species, no matter how small and insignificant it might seem, has a role to play in this amazing tapestry of life. This tapestry that today we are destroying, thread by thread by thread. I learned out in the rainforest too about a spiritual connection that we have with Mother Nature. And it's that spiritual connection with Mother Nature as we move further and further away and depend more and more on technology and virtual reality. We're losing that as well. Why did I leave that wonderful world, though, where I was living a life that was even more amazing than anything I dreamed of? It was because in 1986, I helped us to organize a conference to bring the people who by then were studying chimpanzees in 7 different parts of Africa. When I began, it was just me. We wanted to find out how chimpanzee behavior was similar in all these different habitats, or perhaps how it differed. And at that conference, we had a session on conservation. It was shocking. Everywhere where chimpanzees were being studied, forests were disappearing, chimpanzee numbers were plummeting. Judged on the spread of forest across Africa, it's thought that somewhere between 1 and 2 million, maybe closer to 2 million chimpanzees once lived on the African continent. But by 1986, that number had already dropped to about 400,000 or less. And the threats facing the chimpanzees, the destruction of the forest, the beginning of the bushmeat trade, the commercial hunting of wild animals for food, shooting of mothers to steal their infants for sale as pets or overseas for entertainment, and in those days, medical research. The fact that African human communities living around the forests were growing in number, moving deeper and deeper into chimp habitat, and taking with them diseases to which chimpanzees are susceptible, but which they had not, in an evolutionary sense, had a chance to stand up to. And so for all these reasons, chimpanzee numbers were dropping, and the habitat was being spoiled. I went to that conference as a scientist, planning to carry on with my wonderful life. I left as an activist, and since that time, I haven't been more than 3 weeks consecutively in any one place, and those 3-week periods are never more than 2 per year. Trouble was that I didn't make this decision, it just happened. I always liken it to St. Paul on the road to Damascus. And yes, I knew I needed to try to help, but I didn't know what to do. Managed to get some money together. I thought I needed to learn more firsthand about the problems faced by chimps, because I don't think you can talk about anything really meaningfully unless you have some hands-on experience. So I got money to visit 7 different chimpanzee range countries, talked to the people studying them there, learned a lot. I well remember the first time I saw an infant chimp. He was about 1.5 years old, or younger, and he was tied up in the hot sun with a rope around his waist on top of a little wire cage in an African market. And I could see as he curled up and his eyes were glazed, he seemed to have given up hope. But when I went up to him and made the very soft sound of chimpanzee greeting, he sat up and reached a little hand towards me. So I knew I had to do something. You can't buy these sad little orphans in the markets because it perpetrates the trade. But I was able to persuade the American ambassador, to persuade the Minister of the Environment in the Democratic Republic of Congo to confiscate this orphan because it is illegal. Chimpanzees by then were labeled endangered species. That was the beginning of the JGI's sanctuary programs, looking after orphan chimps, giving them the best life we can. You can't just put them back in the forest. So, as I was learning more about the problems faced by the chimpanzees, I was learning something else. I was learning about the plight of so many African people living in and around chimpanzee habitat, the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education facilities, the gradual destruction and erosion of the environment as forests were cut down as their populations expanded. And it came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park where I had begun my research in 1960. And even in 1970 and 75, that little forest was part of what we called the equatorial forest belt that stretched from East Africa across to the West African coast. But when I flew over in 1990, it was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. And the people had overused the farmland. It was infertile. In their desperate effort to grow more food, they'd cut down the trees even on the steep slopes of the valleys, so there was terrible soil erosion. And in the rains, the little streams got clogged up with earth, and the freshwater supplies were in jeopardy. People who were too poor to buy food from elsewhere, and there was nowhere for them to move because of human population growth. And that's when I realized, if we don't do something to help the people, if we can't help them to find ways of making a living without destroying their environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzee. So it was in 1994 that JGI in Tanzania began our Tukari, Take Care or Tukari program. It's just a community conservation program, but it started differently. It wasn't a bunch of arrogant white people marching into a little poor African village, telling them that we knew what to do to put things right. It was a team, 7 locally picked Tanzanians who went into the villages and sat down and listened and asked, what can JGI do to make your lives better? And that's where we began, restoring fertility to the overused farmland without the use of chemicals, helping them grow more food, working with the local Tanzanian authorities to improve health and education. And gradually, as they came to trust us, we could introduce new interventions like water management programs. And then what I think is perhaps the most successful of all, microcredit opportunities where women and a few men can take out tiny loans. It's based on Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank. They can take out tiny loans for environmentally sustainable projects, like getting a few hens to sell the eggs or setting up a little tree nursery. We also got money to provide as many scholarships as we could to keep girls in school during and after puberty, because it's been shown all around the world that as women are empowered and become better educated, family size tends to drop. And we also provided, through local Tanzanians, family planning information. And this program has been so successful that it's now in 104 villages throughout all the remaining range of the chimpanzees in Tanzania. And each of these villages has provided 2 volunteers who learn how to use smartphones. And because most of the wild chimpanzees in Tanzania are not in protected areas, but are in village forest reserves, these volunteers go into their forests and they have decided themselves between them that they will record an illegally cut tree or an animal trap, or on the positive side, a chimpanzee sighting or a nest or a leopard or a pangolin. And they're very proud of this. And so that program is now in a total of 7 African countries. And I can tell you for sure, there are chimpanzees and forests out there in Africa that would not be there without these interventions. So that's something we feel quite proud of, and the program is still growing. Well, I began traveling further and further around the world, talking about these problems, and also, of course, trying to raise money, because you need money to develop such programs. And as I traveled around, I was learning more about what we are doing to the planet. And I talked a lot about similarities between us and chimps, but there are, of course, differences, and the biggest difference, I think, is that the explosive development of the human intellect. So animals are way more intelligent than we used to think. And I hope that we can talk more about that later in our fireside chat. But even the brightest of chimpanzees cannot compare with a species that sent a rocket up to Mars, from which crept a little robot taking photos of the surface of the planet which once was thought maybe might support life as we know it. We've seen the photos. We know that's not true. We've got this one precious green and blue planet Earth. So how is it possible that the most intellectual species is destroying its only home? And it seems that there's been a disconnect between the clever brain and the human heart, love and compassion. And I truly believe it's only when head and heart work in harmony that we can attain our true human potential. Well, as I was traveling around the world learning about what we're doing to the planet, what you all know, I think, and again, maybe we can talk more about that later, but I was meeting so many young people who seemed to have lost hope. And when I asked them in all the different countries, why do you feel depressed? Why do you feel angry? Why don't you seem to care? Well, you've compromised our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. You hear we haven't inherited this planet from our parents, we borrowed it from our children, but we have been stealing our children's future, and we're still stealing it today. And it's time we get together in the little window of time which I believe we have to start healing some of the harm that we've inflicted and perhaps slowing down the danger of the climate crisis. Was it right, though, when the young people said there was nothing they could do about it? I don't think so. And so that's when I started our Roots and Shoots program. Began with 12 high school students in Tanzania. It's now in about 60 countries and growing all the time. We have members in kindergarten, university, and everything in between. Its main message, every single one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day, and we have a choice as to what kind of impact we're going to make. And we decided right from the beginning, every group would choose for itself. It wouldn't be you wouldn't tell them all what to do. They would choose depending on how old they were, what the environmental situation was, how wealthy or poor they were. But they would choose between them projects to help people, to help animals, to help the environment. And so as this program grows, so my hope for the future grows. And we have a young person, Maha Fier, who was mentioned earlier, and she will help you to understand how here in New Zealand, the energy and the commitment of young people as they understand the problems is really one of our greatest hopes for the future. So Maha goes to the Parapara Unu, if I've said that right, college, and she has started her own environmental and humanitarian group, and I'm going to call her now to come up to the podium and tell us about it, and then I'll come back and give you my reasons for hope.
That was the biggest applause I've ever received. I think the only applause I've ever received, so thank you for that. So kia ora, everyone. It is amazing to be speaking to you alongside one of the most influential people this world has ever seen, and someone who has been one of my biggest inspirations. If you had told me I'd be given this opportunity to be here, I would have never, ever believed you. For my 12th birthday, I attended a Jane Goodall lecture. I didn't quite understand who I was going to be listening to, but I remember being surprised by how captivated and interested I was in what this woman was saying. It was like the introduction to a reality which I only thought existed in films. An introduction to the world of conservation and defying the stereotypes placed against you, and a woman who cared deeply about the state of our planet and how we as humanity treated animals and the environment around us. My 12th birthday back in 2014 became a day which awakened me to the possibilities of the things I could achieve in my life, and awakened me to the undeniable need of more people opening up the conversation about how we currently treat our natural world and pushing to nurture our planet instead of exploiting it. I'm now 16 years old, and I live in the Kapiti Coast, where I attend Putapura Umu College. That's how it's pronounced. Sorry. And within Putapura Umu College, I help lead my college's societal, environmental, and animal rights action group called SEER, where all the amazing students involved focus on campaigning and volunteering to help the people within the world, the environment around us, and the wildlife we share our planet with. So follow us on Instagram at SEERofficialNZ, by the way, if you have Instagram. Moving on. What's incredible about SEER is that we are able to cover this wide range of different issues occurring on our Earth at the moment. So when someone asks me what I think the biggest issue is that is happening currently, I'm always a little bit stumped by the question. I could say global poverty, but the areas which are the most impacted by poverty and famine are the areas which lack access to clean water. I could say mental health, as it's one of the biggest issues young people face in Aotearoa today. But people tell us that the way to improve our state of mind, to relieve stress and anxiety, is by going outside, breathing in the fresh air, going to the beach with a friend. Those are some of the solutions placed in front of us, and we may have access to these things right now, but what about in the future? What about when the world is truly at its final tipping point? People's lives are destroyed, animals are suffocating, and our land is on fire. Where will the fresh air be then? We have come to this moment in time where the planet has been placed under pressure to sustain many things. The fabric of life relies on our planet's sustainability as humans live off the land and animals. Animals depend on the land and other species of animals to survive, and our own planet, as in the land we stand on, the air we breathe, the plants we eat, depends on the processes of the food chain and the life of an organism to continue to thrive. We all intertwine with each other in this circle of life. One aspect of our planet cannot sustain itself without the other. The Earth is bigger than just an individual, lost in our own minds and thoughts as well as the city walls, so we forget about everything else our world has to offer. When we drink and eat, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we breathe, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we go outside, swim, run, have a picnic, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. Everything we do relies on the state of our planet. And if that's a fact, then why do we remain hesitant to make the big, sustainable changes that are needed for our planet as we ignore what seems to be the beginning of the end? It seems absurd to me that we are still having some sort of argument of what we can and can't do to solve issues like climate change, ocean pollution, and biodiversity loss. Call for a plastic ban nationwide. No, that's too radical. Call for a country diet change where we all go more plant-based. No, sorry, burgers are actually a part of our genetic makeup. There's all these excuses that are placed in front of us, but what society seems to be struggling with is looking forward. It's my future, it's my friend's future, it's my child's future, and well, it's your future too. Everybody wants to live this fantasized dream of a big house, expensive car, to own high-end quality fashion that's actually polluting our planet. But why can't our concept of luxurious living involve a concept that involves sustainable living? Jane Goodall, you are one of the most inspiring people this world has ever come across. But do you know who also inspires me? The rangatahi out there who will stop at nothing until our future is safe and secured. Young people who are currently fighting for the rights of themselves and our planet. There is so many talented, clever young people here in our community. Paraparaumu College has a robotics group that is currently inventing a beach cleaning robot to go out on highly contaminated beaches. And that is just one example of many that proves how innovative young people are. When decision makers, businesses, our families talk about making sustainable changes and really, truly solving the current environmental issues on our planet, it calls for humans to break the mindset that we will lose too much in this world if we decide to change our ways, but instead reminding people that we will lose a lot more if we don't. Why protect the people, the animals, and the environment around us? Well, that's simple. This is all our home, and we are all needed if we are going to save our home from the dangers it's facing. Ngā mihi nui, thank you.
So now do you see why I say that my greatest reason for hope is the young people today? Everywhere I go, I meet young people like Maha, and younger children too, and university students, and people out in their first jobs, all wanting to tell Dr. Jane what they're doing to make this a better world. And so it's the young people in whom I invest the most hope, but there's also this brain. And if you think that we've sent people onto the moon, I mean, look at when you go out, we know we put people on the moon, we take it for granted, but do please go out and look up at that moon and feel that sense of wonder and awe that I feel every time I look up and think, wow, somebody walked up there. That's pretty amazing. And so we have this incredible brain, and we are beginning to come up with technological solutions. But just as important, we're using our brain to try and leave the lightest ecological footprint every day, leading us towards a better world for the future. My next reason for hope, the resilience of nature. I know there are places in New Zealand that were destroyed, but given time and maybe some help, nature can once again make them beautiful. You have so many animal species on the brink of extinction, and they have been given a second chance by people who care. Social media used in the right way, for the first time in human history, we can reach out to people all around the world and get them to raise their voices and come out in support of some issue, like banning single-use plastic bags, or whatever issue happens to be in the minds of the people who make the call. And finally, there's the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up. I talked about the evil regime of apartheid when I first went to South Africa, thanks to Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 27 years in prison with the amazing ability to forgive. He and de Klerk were able to bring that evil regime to an end. And we find these people, this indomitable spirit, all around us. immigrants who came with nothing, who've perhaps been reviled, and yet they managed to find a place with society and build up a little home for themselves, and you talk to them and you smile and they smile at you. There are people with tremendous physical disabilities, and the last person I want to introduce now, this is Mr. H, given to me by a man called Gary Horn. He went blind when he was 21 in the US Marines. For some odd reason, he decided to become a magician. Everybody said, Gary, you can't be a magician if you're blind. But he does shows for children. He lays out his props beforehand, and they don't know he's blind. And at the end, he'll tell them and say, things may go wrong in your life, you never know. But if they do, don't give up. There is always a way forward. And he does scuba diving and cross-country skiing, even skydiving. And most recently, he's taught himself to paint. Of course, his wife or his son has to dip the brush in the right color. But in that book is a portrait of Mr. H. He gave me Mr. H 29 years ago. He's never seen him, he's only felt him. He thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee. He obviously didn't get around to feeling the tail. So I made him hold the tail. He said, never mind, take him where you go, and you know I'm with you in the spirit. So he's been with me now to 65 countries. And everywhere we go, he makes people smile. And I think we need many more smiles in the world today. So those are my reasons for hope. There's a lot we haven't covered, but I'm really glad that I could bring Maha up here so that you get to see for yourselves why the youth is my greatest reason for hope. But anyway, thank you all for coming. I know we're going to have a little intermission, and then I'll be back with Jesse, and perhaps we can touch on one or two of the things that we didn't touch.
Thanks for all your questions, by the way. I'll try and cover as many as I can. I would like to begin this part of the show by showing you a cartoon. It's a cartoon by an artist called Gary Larson. How do you explain Gary Larson to the younger members of the audience? It's basically what we used to do for fun before the Snapchat gender face swap filter thing. I totally butchered that punchline, but you know where I was going with it. So this Gary Larson cartoon, see if can we get that up on the big screen? Two chimps. One says, well, another blonde hair, conducting a little more research with that Jane Goodall tramp.
And you realize it's the female who says that.
Were you very offended when you saw this cartoon?
I didn't see about it. I was out in the field, but to my absolute horror, the woman who was the executive director of JGI USA at that time got a lawyer to write a letter to Gary Larson saying that it was extremely objectionable to us because it implied that I had sexual relationships with a chimpanzee. Some people.
No sense of humor.
Well, I didn't.
Well, but how about the camera guy that showed up? I've seen the documentary. You can't put anything past me.
You had your wrong glasses on.
Somebody sent me a tweet during the break, and this probably will go to this cartoon. So you've appeared in a Gary Larson cartoon, you've voiced yourself in The Simpsons, and someone wants to know if there's anything left on the bucket list.
The what?
The bucket list.
Oh, on my bucket list?
The list of things you want to do before...
No, I understand what a bucket list is. You know, there were a lot of things, a lot of places I wanted to go, but I couldn't go to those places now. So I just want a critical mass of young people who understand that while we need money to live, we shouldn't live for money unless we're living for money to make the world a better place, e.g. by giving it to JGI.
Good, it's good. I have a rare photo of your first encounter with the chimp. This is a good one. Can we get that up on the big screen? Is that okay? Oh, look at that. You know that photo, and I want to ask you a serious question. This is, I think your father gave you, this is Jubilee. Yeah. Is there an element of destiny in your life?
Well, a lot of people think that this was destiny, but, you know, at that time when I first wanted to go to Africa, the idea of studying chimpanzees was, you know, way out in another league. I mean, they were exotic creatures, nobody knew anything about them. And I had absolutely zero aspiration to study a chimpanzee. It was when I met Leakey. It was his dream to have somebody study the chimpanzees, not mine. And how lucky was I?
But as you said in your talk, there are so many chances that put you where you ended up. You know, the guy needing a Lewis Leakey needing a secretary.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't believe in coincidence anymore. I think there are choices along our life, and what we have to do is try and make the right choice at the right time. That's how it's been for me anyway.
And how about, speaking of chance, how about that walk you were taking back from the beach, I think it was, to get lunch on holiday? Do you remember that story?
Oh, and yes. This was in the war. And there was very little along the south coast where you could actually get onto the sand. And because we had barbed wire and scaffolding and stuff, you know, the German invasion was expected. And that was when Churchill was talking about, we will fight them on the beaches. And all the old men with their pitchforks. I mean, we were not protected at all. But anyway, this one little place where you could actually get on the sand, my mother and her friend, and there were 4 of us children. And usually Mum went up the little lane straight to our little guest house. On this occasion, she announced that she was going to go the long way round. She'd never done it before. She didn't have a very good heart, so she always went the short way. And on this one day, she said, I'm going to go the long way round. And her friend said, but then you'll miss lunch. You know, it wasn't like a hotel. Lunch was 12, and you missed it. So Mum said, well, you can take your children the other way, but I'm going this way. And so luckily Daphne was a follower, and she followed. And I still remember looking up at the sky. It was very blue, like the sky today here, and seeing this plane really high, and it looked like 2 little black cigars coming out, and watching them. And then the mothers threw themselves on top of us, and there was this huge explosion, and one of them was right there on that little path where we would have been if Mum hadn't gone the other way. I wouldn't be here.
So you are where you were meant to be, I reckon.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I really think so.
So you've got the chimp in this photo, and then this chimp here that we've met.
He's a monkey because he had a tail, remember?
Yeah, okay.
Gary thought he was a chimp, but he was blind, and he hadn't just got around to feeling the tail. You're not blind, and you can see he's got a tail.
I mean, my PhD at Cambridge is not yet complete, but yes, I can see. Do you want to take a moment and talk about, we'll save the cow, but what about these other 2?
Well, okay, remember I said in my talk that we now know so much about animal intelligence, and I think I'll start with Ratty. Rats turn out to be unbelievably intelligent. And you know those, I can't remember what they call them, when dogs have to go up and down and round posts, or I don't know what they call them, intelligence tests or something. Well, rats can do it better, quicker than dogs. But this represents a giant forest rat from Africa. And like ordinary rats, they have amazing sense of smell. And they've been trained to detect the scent of the explosive of a landmine buried under the ground. And across Africa after the civil wars, many landmines are left. It's mostly women and children working in the fields who get a foot blown off. And this friend of mine in Belgium, he thought, I guess I can teach these rats who live 9 years. They are so good. They have been credited with clearing Mozambique of landmines. They do a little scratch, and then a team come along to defuse the bomb. But they're also now taught to recognize the smell of ivory. Some learn rhino horn, some learn pangolin, some learn tiger. And the advantage over dogs, who can also smell these, is that in the ports they can climb up the crates and they can detect these illicit substances right up there. So they are completely amazing. Now, Piglet, we need the poo Piglet, but it now turns out that pigs are as intelligent as dogs, more intelligent than some, and yet, we treat them in factory farms as things, and it's been shown that they actually can understand and fear approach. They may not know about death, but they know about the pain that's coming to them. But I want everybody out there, after this, not now, but when you get home, Google not Picasso the artist, but Pigcasso. Pigcasso lives in Cape Town, was rescued from slaughter. And when you see what Pigcasso can do, it's absolutely amazing. I'm not going to say, I'll leave you curious.
And so animals have intelligence. Can I ask you, and you don't have to go with the scientific community on this, you haven't in the past, do animals have emotions?
Of course they do. Have you had dog or cat?
Of course.
You have?
Yeah.
Well, you know, don't you, that they can feel sad or happy? It's obvious. We know that they can grieve. You know the story of that orca who carried her dead baby for 2 weeks or something? And so many animals show desperate grief, and little dogs go on waiting for their master who's died for weeks and weeks. One famous, he was called Scottish Bobby. For the rest of his life, he would not leave the place where he last saw his master.
But I should say that scientists will say that we are anthropomorphizing, that we're projecting human qualities onto these lesser beings.
Well, fortunately, there's enough science now that prove that the emotions come from the same part of the brain. When we think they're sad, the cells in the brain activated are the same as those in humans when we say we feel sad, and so on.
For my next question, can I get a sense from the audience, how many people had a methane-free dinner tonight? Make some noise. It's beef-free dinner.
I haven't had dinner, but...
Lots of people would like a quick word from you on what you've got to say about a plant-based diet.
Well, this is where I introduce cow. And the thing is that over the last, 10 years, countries have got wealthier, and more people have been eating more and more meat and more dairy. And, in places like China, it's a status symbol now. And we have to be concerned about the conditions in the factory farms. And there's a survivor of the Holocaust who was in Treblinka, and he's written a book called Eternal Treblinka about these factory farms. And he says it's the same or worse for the animals as it was for us. But maybe people don't care about that. They need to be fed. To feed them, you destroy environments to grow the grain. Then you use masses of fossil fuel to get the grain from the fields to the animals to the abattoir, the meat to the table. And then on top of that, it uses lots of water to turn plant to animal protein. And losing fresh water supplies is one of the major concerns for the future. And as if that wasn't enough, food goes in one end, right, and gas comes out the other. And that's methane. We all do it in our digestion. I hope nobody's going to demonstrate, please. And that gas is methane, and that's an even more virulent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so if people don't care about animal cruelty, if they don't care about the environment, maybe their health, and these animals, to keep them alive, they're routinely fed antibiotics. So the bacteria have built up resistance, and that's why people are sometimes dying of these superbugs. But the antibiotics are gradually losing their power over infections. So eating less meat and less dairy is something everybody can do to help mitigate the effects of the climate crisis.
Got another photo to show you, if I can. Can we get the next one, please? I can try and click it myself. We'll come to it in a moment. This is I'll take you back a wee bit. So we're both doing it at the same time. Let's do that one, yeah. It's you with your family. A lot of people were asking about your family, and I want to focus on your mum, who you mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you still apply her wisdom to the work you're doing today?
Do you
still apply her wisdom, the lessons you learned?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you know, she was so wise. I already said how amazing she let me go off to Africa alone at 23. She taught me that if you're trying to change somebody's mind, it's no good arguing. You need to tell stories to reach the heart. But you also need to listen to them in case they have something you've never thought of, which will help you to discuss things with them. And I don't know, and I hear her voice all the time. So does my sister, who's in that shot. She's 4 years younger than me. My father I barely knew because he joined up at the beginning of the war when I was 4.5, and then they divorced before the end of the war. So, but I think I inherited my tough physique from him.
Speaking of family, a lot of people, having seen the Jane documentary that you mentioned earlier, are interested in your son, Grub. How is he doing, and what a life he had?
Well, he's now got a brand new way of making houses which are cheap. He can make a 5-room, 2-story house in a week. The method he's using is amazingly environmentally friendly. The houses can withstand hurricanes and floods, and there's all kinds of I won't go into it, but it's an incredible process. And he's got a partner, and it's about to, I think, break into the news.
And he didn't mind gratuitous footage of him running around naked as a 3-year-old, going Netflix worldwide?
He said, I don't really feel any relationship to that little creature.
Oh. Took you back though, seeing that footage?
Oh, wow, it took me back. Wasn't he gorgeous?
Yeah.
Anybody who's seen it. It's on Netflix, by the way. So if you want to see my gorgeous little boy, you can look at Jane on Netflix.
Let's take a look at the next photo, if we can. It's a photo of you with a very striking message. There is still a lot left worth fighting for. And I'd like to ask you about the recent report from the UN that says, of course, the big headline was that about 1 million plant and animal species are on the verge of extinction.
Yeah. And people say, was I surprised? No, because, you know, I've been talking about this for years. And 1 million, well, give or take, I mean, a lot of the 1 million were very tiny insects and very small plants that people don't seem to care about. But like I said, each one has a role to play. And sometimes a tiny little species may be the major food of another species. That may go extinct. That may have been the major food of something else. And this can have this, you know, ripple effect and can lead to the death of an entire ecosystem. There are examples out there.
There are almost 4,000 species threatened here in New Zealand. Someone wanted to know if you have a favourite.
Oh, the kakapo.
Oh, good answer.
Yes, I knew Don Merton just before he died, and actually I've written a whole chapter. It got left out of Hope for Animals in Their World because they said it was getting too long. But I think I want to republish that book in an Australian edition, because there are so many amazing stories, reasons for hope in Australia, in New Zealand, I mean. But, well, I've only just arrived from Australia. Sometimes I don't even know, I get up in the morning and I go to the wrong, you can't tell where you are.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And the kakapo is in New Zealand. And there's hundreds of stories in New Zealand about animals rescued. But, the thing that bothers me is this talking about pest species. Now, we know there's invasive species of plants and animals. We know that they shouldn't be here. We brought them here. We know that to protect the amazing indigenous species of New Zealand, the invasive species somehow need to go. But to talk about a feral cat as a pest, the feral cat has the same emotions and personality as your household pet. And it's the same for the others. So yes, they need to go, but we have to find a way, get our brains together, do it in the most humane way.
And respectfully.
And give them respect. It really,
Agreed. Agreed. People ask you how to stop extinctions. This is probably less true in New Zealand, but in developing countries. And one of your answers is to reduce poverty. Can you join the dots there?
Yes. Well, poverty, I learned about this in Africa. So when you're living on the poverty line, you are going to cut down the last trees in order to grow food, to find some fertile land, because you have to. And if you're poor in a city, you're going to buy the cheapest food. You cannot afford to ask, as we can, where did it come from? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Did it lead to cruelty to animals? You buy the cheapest in order to survive. So if we want people to make wise choices that will benefit future generations, we have to A, alleviate this poverty, B, find, and this is what Maha talked about so eloquently, find ways where we leave a less heavy footprint because of our unsustainable society, way of living. And it was Mahatma Gandhi who said, the planet can provide enough for human need, but not human greed. But then finally, we are on a planet of finite natural resources. It doesn't make any sense to me when we talk about unlimited economic development. Already in some places, we have destroyed more of the natural resources, taken them, than Mother Nature can replenish. And then on top of that, our human population keeps growing. So what's going to happen? We have to address all these three terribly important issues. And I think alleviating poverty is the easiest of them. If we put the money we use for making war machines to alleviating poverty, there wouldn't be poverty anymore.
We would take this look at this next slide.
David Greybeard.
I love this shot.
Yeah.
It's a great outfit, by the way.
That's the shot where all the scientists said, well, Jane Goodall's only got fame because of her legs. That's what they said.
And you knew that to protect the chimps, we had to protect the people in the villages, or help the people in the villages around the chimps. That's quite a holistic approach, and I imagine reasonably ahead of its time.
There were other NGOs, and they were sort of helping the local communities. They would give them some money, and they would, sometimes give them some food. But what we did was original in that it was the local people. It was the idea of giving a fish hook to catch a fish rather than feeding them fish. But the same thing, respect. We respected them. We respected their opinion. We worked with them to try and find ways that they could live without destroying the environment. Today, they become our partners in conservation because they understand that protecting the environment, the forest, the streams, is not just for wildlife, but but it's for their own future.
Could we have another look at that slide? Because I've got a question for you. And someone else asked this question too. Would you say anything to her?
Which slide, this one?
Yeah. Would you say anything to a young Jane, presumably not a Dr. Jane Goodall, a young Jane Goodall, maybe a Baroness? Would you say anything to her about, warn her about anything, tell her to do anything differently?
If it was today, then we wouldn't have this contact, because we know chimpanzees can catch our infectious diseases. That wasn't even thought about back then. And I think for me, going out and making contact with the chimps was rather like the anthropologists did when they went and gave beads to uncontacted tribes of people. Yes, this guy, probably 10 times stronger than me, but there was, it was, I don't know, I've always had this good relationship with animals, and I never had any fear of them. And it's like when I was sleeping up in the hills, and I'd always been afraid of leopards, and I would hear a leopard, and I was on my own, so what did I do? Put a blanket over my head. And I said, well, I'm sure nothing will hurt me because I'm meant to be here. So everybody said, well, that was stupid. And I said, but they didn't hurt me, so was it stupid? Anyway, this relationship I had with those particular chimpanzees at that time, it all came back when I looked at that movie, Jane, because this was the time it was made. And they were almost like my family.
Have a quick look at the next slide, please.
Yes, that's one of, I'm not quite sure which, it's one of Fifi's offspring. I don't know all the younger generation, because I'm only back there a couple of days each year. But, I mean, isn't this a great photo?
Yeah, it's great. And the next slide, please. So, this guy. We actually had a couple of questions about him. You and Sir David Attenborough are the generation that helped so many of us understand the natural world. And he said, I'm just coming up to 93, and so I don't have many more years around here, and I find it difficult to think beyond that because the signs aren't good. He says that he said that we are wrecking the environment without even noticing. Do you think that's true? Do you think that we don't notice, or that we just don't care enough?
I think a lot of people don't notice. And I think the thing is, the loss of species and the destruction of the environment have been just going on gradually. So children are born into a world very different from the world I was born into. So I remember how it was when we weren't even having to worry about conservation. It was all there. But now today, they're born into a world where there are fewer insects and fewer birds, and so they don't really understand how far we've gone along the path of destruction. And that's why I'm traveling all the time, trying to tell them about it. And of course, David Attenborough, a lot of his films just show the pretty nice side of it and not the dark side. But fortunately, more and more people like Leonardo DiCaprio is making films that show what we're doing to harm the environment.
Did I read this right, that you and Leonardo DiCaprio are releasing a clothing line?
I'm on his board and he's on mine, and he has created a project called the Ape Project, and T-shirts showing all the great apes, and we're an ape, not
I do, because I heard you say it earlier, but I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah, we're the 5th grade ape. Because
I don't have a tail.
And you don't have a tail. That's right, so that makes you a great ape. But I said apes because we want to include the gibbons as well. So there's this T-shirt, and all the proceeds from it go towards the Ape Project. And JGI gets money from the chimp part of the Ape Project, but the gorillas get money, and the orangutans who so desperately need it.
Yeah, someone asked about orangutans as well. Let's take a look at this next slide. Speaking of celebrity collaborations, what do you make of the work that Al Gore has done to raise attention to climate change, or as the UN asked us to call it now, the climate crisis?
Yeah, well, the inconvenient truth, and he's got so many people going around talking about the climate crisis in school. So he's done a lot to raise awareness.
How do we rewind the future?
Well, we get young people to change the way they behave. I mean, it is a very dark time today, not just environmentally. And of course, we've got corruption everywhere. But this swing to the far right, where countries are now being increasingly governed or whatever by people who don't seem to care about the environment. And you can go from President Trump to the president of Brazil. You can go to our president in Tanzania. And again and again and again, environmental protections are violated. So we need people like Al Gore and Leonardo and to talk about the fact that we're creating tremendous harm.
Lots of people during the break were asking me to ask you, what is one concrete thing we can do, one meaningful thing that we can do as individuals? Do you have a view on that?
Well, I've already said we can eat less or no meat, that's one, and dairy. But, the most important thing is to think about the consequences of the choices you make each day. And if everybody makes ethical choices, first hundreds, then thousands, then millions, hopefully billions, then we move towards a much better world. And some of the people making those choices will be CEOs of major companies. So the choice they make, whether they sign a check or they don't, can have huge impact on the future. Presidents even more. But the great thing is that a lot of these powerful people have children. So we need to reach out to their children. And again I meet parents who say, well, of course I recycle, my kids make me. Of course I understand about biodiversity, my children tell me. And so we haven't to give up, and we have to create a critical mass of young people who understand that we must change our mindset. We must learn to do with less. How many people have so much more than they actually need? I bet you have more than you need. I have more than I need.
I do my best, Jane.
I know, I do my best too.
I was thinking, when you talk about this, I was thinking so many people have learned to calorie count, right? Oh, I'll have that muffin. Oh, no, I won't. I can't do it. I'm trying to watch my calories today. And maybe we just need something in our head that before you consume or throw out or take the car, you've got this little ticker going, oh, no, I shouldn't do that. And maybe it's not there front and center enough for enough people.
Yeah, maybe. But every time you find a solution, you find another problem. Like, for example, if we go shopping, I mean, I hate shopping, but lots of people go shopping. Go to Hong Kong, everybody goes shopping. They live in shopping malls. And you buy, or they buy, another dress because they were going to another party. Do they need it? No, they don't need it. But the consumer-driven society is what drives so many businesses, gives so many people a way of living. And then you get the downside of it. You get it being sold cheaply because it's been made in India or somewhere like that with child slave labor and sweatshops, and a completely terrible way where the people are paid not even a proper living wage. And then if you get I don't want to call it, when a country, an economic crisis.
Oh, yeah.
An economic crisis. And the government, what does it do? It urges us to buy because that builds up the economy again. But we're buying too much, we're needing too much, we're taking too much from the environment. So what do? That's where our intellects have to get together, and we have to sit down with economists and business leaders and really lay out what we are doing to the planet and what that will mean to future generations if we don't make change, and if we don't make change quickly.
Can we have Someone asked me who you are inspired by. Are you inspired by, I think it's Greta Thunberg, who has made some very famous...
I think the fact that she's got school children around the world marching, I mean, I think it does draw attention to the climate crisis. But I say to young people, you know, you're pointing a finger at your government and you're saying, we demand that you do more for our future. But as well as marching, I think the young people need to roll up their sleeves and take action, like our Roots and Shoots and many other youth movements, so that you actually walk your talk, or in this case, you march your talk. And you can say to the government, well, yes, I'm doing this, I'm planting trees. I'm walking to school instead of taking a lift in a car. That sort of thing. It's really important that you not only march, which is probably fun and you can get off school, but that you actually roll up your sleeves and do something so you do it as well.
Is losing hope one of our greatest enemies?
Oh, if we lose hope, there's no point, is there? If you don't think there's any hope for the future, why bother? Why bother?
What about Donald Trump?
What about Donald Trump?
Is he an alpha male?
Oh, he's one of those show-off, swaggering kinds of chimp-like alpha males. And it's a bit rude to the chimps.
And people vote for him not because intellectually he's making great arguments, not because he's getting to their brains, but he's getting to their hearts, isn't he?
I think the reason Donald Trump was elected and the reason the Brexit result came out the way it is that whole sections of populations are kept undereducated, underserviced, they don't get proper health care, and they're angry and they see the gap between haves and have-nots widening, and they want change, but they haven't been well enough educated often to understand what the vote that they make will actually mean.
Kate on Twitter would like to know, where do you call home?
Home is the house I grew up in. It's in England, in Bournemouth, on the south coast. My sister lives in it with her family. We own it jointly. It's a family home. My grandmother insisted that it can only be sold if every member of the family agrees.
And you are there how often?
Well, 300 days on the road, whatever's left, but it's usually like 5 days, 4 days, and then twice a year. There's meant to be 3-week breaks, but they've got messed up now because of opportunities.
Rachel would like to know how we encourage more young women into science.
I think it's happening. And lots of people have credited me with encouraging young women to become scientists. So I'm always being asked to write things for, young women. I think the reason that women tended not to go into science wasn't just because it was a male-dominated field, but because, like when I went into science, it was so shocking. I was told, you can't have empathy with your subject. That's not scientific. You've got to be objective, which means you've got to be cold. And I think there's some sort of, women were, through evolution, we were sort of created to be empathetic and to be nurturing. So science was a cold, nasty place when I was young.
You wouldn't have got the results you did if you'd been cold.
No, and that's why Leakey particularly wanted somebody who hadn't been to college, whose mind hadn't been corrupted by what he thought of as the reductionist scientific thinking of the time. He never said that to me. He just sent me off. And all I knew, I mean, there was no study out there like that. So I just did what I'd done when I was watching the squirrels and the birds at home.
What did he see in you? You addressed it a little bit in your talk, but why did he choose you?
Well, I think, first of all, as I said, he was impressed by how much I knew about animals. But then he let me go on he used to go every summer for 3 months with his wife and one other person and a few Africans to search for human fossils in Olduvai Gorge, which is on the Serengeti. And just after I became his secretary, he allowed me to join that little tiny group of people. And in those days, there were animals everywhere. So, Gillian and I were allowed to walk out after the hard day's work, digging for fossils. And one evening we met a rhino, and it was as close as the wall there. And luckily they don't see very, it was a young male lion. And he followed us at least the length of this whole auditorium, maybe a bit further, which was a little bit scary, but it was very exciting. And afterwards, Lewis told me that in both occasions I'd reacted exactly as I should have. And so I think, he'd been looking for someone, he says, for 10 years to study the chimps, and I guess he just thought I was the right person.
You thought like the lion. Someone wanted to hide in the long grass, and you said, "No, that's the lion's territory."
That's right. Yeah, Gillian said, "Let's go and hide in the thickets." And I said, "No, the lion will know where we are, but we won't have a clue where the lion is." I said, "We need to walk up out of the gorge onto the plains," which is what we did.
Almost to our final part of this Q&A, I just wanted to give the opportunity, as there are so many young people here, to say something about education, because the story of you not going to university and doing very well anyway, I know that you are very passionate about getting educated.
Yes, well, I think today things are different. And, you can really go to college and learn about the environment, which is important. It's much harder today to get a job in a scientific field if you haven't been to college. So people do manage to get on, but they do it by volunteering in animal shelters and things like that, or volunteering for a scientific project. And a lot of people now are going back to college in later life. So, for young people, first of all, if they think they want to do something to do with the environment or animal behavior, they've got to really want to do it, because it's hard to get the money and there aren't that many places. So you've got to be passionate. And if they fail, like if you go to Asia, the push for young people is to go into business to make money. And they come up to me sometimes crying and saying, "But we want to do something for the environment." So I'm not going to set them up against their parents and their teachers. So I say, well, why don't you do what they want, make lots of money, and later on, you can then move and do what you really want to do. Don't give up. You can start doing something for the environment when you're 30, 40, 50, 60 even. And, so don't give up just because you can't do it straight away. After all, I had to do secretarial, I had to have a boring job, I had to be a waitress, and then leaky secretary. So it wasn't just from this to that. It was kind of, wiggly.
We've really enjoyed hearing that story of how you ended up there. I have one more question. We've selected 2 members of the audience to come and ask a question. If you guys could come up now, please. And I do have to, once again, just want to make sure they get their name absolutely right or I'll be in trouble. There are 24 pages in my hand. There we go. So, no, I've left it back there. Yealand's Wine, thank you very much, remembered that one. And News Talk ZB, and the Jane Goodall Institute New Zealand, and Loop, who together have made tonight possible. Thank you. And do we have a Marge ready to ask us a question? Marge, would you like to come up and ask your question? There's a little microphone up here, you can come up. Is that what you're asking me? Do I have your question? Yeah. You've forgotten, yeah. I think I've got it in my pocket. You could just ad-lib a question. Ask her who's going to win Dancing with the Stars. I think it was about hope.
Yeah, it was, but actually, and Game of Thrones maybe too. But sorry, no. We're constantly bombarded from the media with very negative stories about the environment and the impact that is having, and the changes that are going to happen in the future. And when I hear all of that, I think of the younger generations, and I'm concerned that they will lose hope because there's just negativeness coming all the time through the media. So how do we get past that and find that hope?
I didn't hear properly.
How do we find hope in the face of overwhelming negative coverage of what's going to happen?
Well, first of all, when I'm traveling around the world, I meet many amazing people doing incredible things. I meet people who've really restored a forest, who've cleaned up a stream. I meet people who've made inventions that will help us to deal with CO2 pollution, for example. And so when you meet so many people, and so many people with the indomitable human spirit, you know, that gives you hope. And then the young people, everywhere I go, wanting to tell Dr. Jane what they're doing to make this a better world. And I call them evil people among us who are destroying the environment. They won't live forever. We want young people who are ready to take over when that time comes.
Can I say it's so lovely to be here and yeah, thank you. So great to be here. Come on up, Celia, by the way, who's next. So nice to be here in Wellington, which is Hope HQ here in New Zealand, between what people have been doing, Crofton Downs and the Zealandia Sanctuary and Good Nature, and there are so many incredible stories in this beautiful city, so thank you for having us. Celia, one more question from the floor. Hi.
Hi, Jane. You must have met many, many people over the years that you've inspired to make changes to help animals, humans and in the environment. I'm just wondering if you've got a favourite story that comes to mind of what changes they've made in their lives?
Somebody that you have inspired that you could tell us about.
Well, it's difficult because there's so many. You know, I mean, after every lecture, people come up and say, you inspired me to do what I'm doing. And can I pick one of them? I don't know. And you know, Roots and Shoots, we got about 150,000 active groups, and a group can be a whole school. But we've also got all those who've been through Roots and Shoots. So, you know, I began working in China in about the mid-90s, just when it was beginning to open up. And people come up to me in China now and say, well, of course we care about the environment. We were in Roots and Shoots in primary school. You know, of course we care about animals. We watched your geographic documentaries in Roots and Shoots in primary school. So all of these people in different ways have been inspired to do their bit to inspire others.
And there are the people who are still, thanks Celia, who are still helping the chimps. And maybe if we can go to this last photo that I wanted to show you, which is...
Rebecca.
And is that Wunda?
That's Wunda when she was very young.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you, because we're going to play a video and perhaps you can tell us all that we need to know before we play the video.
Yeah, well, can we get the slide back? Thank you. And then at the end, I'll just end it up with what's happened now. So when Wunda first came to us, she was a tiny baby and she was nearly dead. She'd been wounded by the bullet that killed her mother for bushmeat. And in the local language, Wunda means close to death. Rebecca is an amazing veterinarian and she cured her. And then when Wunda was about 4 years older than this, when she was about 10 or 11, she got really sick again, and Rebecca cured her with a first chimpanzee blood-to-blood transfusion. And so the video, which some people will have seen, is when we were releasing Wunda, into an island paradise. And what I would like all of you to remember when you watch this video, I had not met Wounda before, so that can't be Wounda actually.
It's just a beautiful chimp.
It's one of our orphans. It's in same sanctuary, Chimpunga, and I think it's a young male, but it doesn't really matter. It's the Chimpunga sanctuary. And when I met Wounda, she was about 10, 11 years old, and I had not met her before, so that can't be Wounda, after all.
So, it's a great photo, though.
Yes, and I know who it is, but I just can't think of her name.
So we are going to join you on a boat, I think, taking Wounda, who you haven't met before,
Yes.
back to the wild. And let's take a look at that.
This is a really exciting moment for me. The Jane Goodall Institute's Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center in the Republic of Congo has for years been caring for infants whose mothers were killed, mostly for the illegal bushmeat trade. Many of them are now fully grown. Recently, we acquired 3 large forested islands on the beautiful Kwilu River, where we can release many of the chimpanzees from our overcrowded center. In here is Wounda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise. She's the 15th chimpanzee to get her freedom here. And we hope ultimately to have about 60 on the island. Today is the first time I've met Wounda. I talked to her on the boat, trying to reassure her. She must have wondered what was happening. None of us could predict exactly what she would do once the cage door opened. It was a very, very touching moment. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me. The warmth of her embrace is something I shall never forget. For Wounda and all the other chimpanzees we're working to bring here, Chinzula Island will provide a wonderful forest home where they will be cared for and safe. So that was about 4 years ago. And Wounda is now the dominant female of a group of 30. And she's even dominating some of the adult males, although that eventually will change because males always end up dominant. They're bigger and stronger and, Anyway, our females are on birth control. They have implants because there's still babies coming in. We've got about nearly 170 in the sanctuary. It's the biggest in Africa. It's incredibly expensive. And so they're on birth control. But in all these years, only 2 have ever gone wrong. And one of them was Wounda. So 3 years ago on the island, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Mother and child are doing really well. And we've called that baby Hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, keep it going for Dr. Jane Goodall.
you, thank you, thank you.